The title of this message is True Grief and Humility. And we're in 1 Samuel, the 31st chapter. And we're going to go back over and read a few verses that we used in the last message, but it is pertinent to our message now. So we'll read them again. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel. The men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan. First one, Jonathan, the innocent one. And Abinadab, Malchi, Shuah, the sons of Saul. And the battle went heavily against Saul, and the archers hit him. And he was badly wounded by the archers. Not only is he wounded now, he knows that they're going to catch him. They're probably going to decapitate him. They may even disembowel him while he's alive. All of this stuff, so he wants to die before they get there to him. Then Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword, pierce me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and pierce me through and make sport of me." But his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. So Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. Now I want you to know something. Those swords weren't really super sharp back then. It took a hard blow. And I know you out there, most of you out there have never tried to stab anything or anyone with a knife. And it's not an easy thing to do. But Saul fell on his own sword, and he had to really throw himself on that sword for it to penetrate him. And it wasn't an instant death. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. And Saul died with his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men on that day together. And when the men of Israel, who were on the other side of the valley with those who were beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel fled before Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned the cities and fled. Then the Philistines came and lived in them. And it came about in the next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped off his weapons, and sent them throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. And they put his weapons in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth Shan. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard that the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and walked all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh, and they burned them there. Here we have cremation in the Bible. Cremation in the Bible. And they took the bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh. And they fasted 7 days. And now we go into 2 Samuel. I'll give you an introduction to 2 Samuel the next time, but not this time. Right now we're right in the middle of the story. And by the way, I don't give a lot of details as to all the names, what the meanings of them are or anything, because I don't want to divert your attention away from the story. Now we come to David. What does David think about the death of Saul and his sons? Saul chased after him for years, trying to kill him. And you'd think that the man would say, "Oh boy, my enemy is gone. Wow, now I can sleep peaceful tonight." But David was a man of true grief, genuine grief, and genuine humility. He knew that Saul was anointed king over Israel, and he wasn't ever going to raise a hand against him. And when he was killed, he genuinely grieved for him. And we're going to read his words, how David felt and how he acted at this time in his life when he should have been rejoicing in all reality, now it came about after the death of Saul, that when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, that David remained 2 days in Ziklag. And it happened on the 3rd day that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul, and his clothes torn, and dust on his head. And he came there, and he came to David, and he fell on the ground and prostrated himself. Then David said to him, "From where do you come?" And he said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." Now, I don't know where this man got this information. We know that this man did not kill Saul. Whether he was close to Saul when he saw all this happen, and he takes credit for this, we do not know. Not everything that this man said is inspired of God. I want you to understand that. It's hearsay. But we're going to see how David receives it. And David said, "How did things go? Please tell me." And he said, "The people have fled from the battle, and as many of the people have fallen or dead. And Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also." And David said to the young man who told him this, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead? How do you know this? What are your sources?" Now, something's array here. I want you to know something is not exactly right about what this man says. And the young man who told him said, "By chance I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and behold, Saul was leaning on his spear. And behold, the chariots and the horsemen pursued him closely. And when he looked behind him, he saw me and called me, and I said, 'Here I am.' And he said to me, 'Who are you?' I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' Then he said to me, 'Please stand beside me and kill me. For agony has seized me because of my life still lingers in me.'" In other words, I'm dying. Now, maybe he fell on his sword. Maybe he was still alive because it wasn't easy to kill himself. Maybe. Something's going on here, though. So I stood beside him and I killed him because I knew that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown which was on his head and the bracelet which was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord." David took hold of his clothes. He tore them. And so also did all the men who were with him. Now, tearing your clothes is a great show of sorrow and grief. And they mourned, and they wept, and they fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan and the people of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. And David said to the young man, "Who told him, 'Where are you from?' And he answered, 'I am the son of an alien, an Amalekite.' Then David said to him, 'How is it that you were not afraid to stretch out your hand and to destroy the Lord's anointed?' And David called one of the young men and said, 'Go cut him down.' So he struck him and he died. He had him killed. And David said to him, 'Your blood is upon your own head, for your mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed.' Then David chanted. Now David begins to sing a mournful song. This would be like a country and western song today, so to speak. Then David chanted with his lament over Saul and Jonathan his son. It meant that he said it over and over and over again. And he told them to teach the sons of Judah the song of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher. Now, the book of Jasher is a historical novel, so to speak. The book of Jasher records the history all the way from Adam all the way up into this period of time. It's quoted in the Bible at least 4 times. And here we refer to the book of Jasher. The title of that book is Ha-Sefer Yashur, the scribe Jasher. He was a historian. Your beauty, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How have the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exalt. O mountains of Gilboa, let not dew or rain be upon you, nor the fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty has been defiled. The shield of Saul, not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty. The bow of Jonathan did not turn back. And now David goes on and starts talking about his bosom friend. He had deep love for Jonathan. Jonathan had deep love for him. The bow of Jonathan did not turn back. And the sword of Saul did not return empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and pleasant in their life. David loved Saul. David loved Saul. Have you ever loved someone that hated you? It's real hard to do. It's a real hard task. It is a suicidal task in so many ways. Saul and Jonathan, beloved, pleasant in their life, and in their death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. Have you ever seen an eagle fall down on prey? In 1958, I'll never forget it. It was in the fall of the year. I was going to school. I was riding a bus from the Snow Goose Ranch up the valley to Dyer School. I'll never forget this, probably as long as I live. I love animals and I don't like to see things suffer. But I saw this golden eagle, and the golden eagle had been sitting here on this pile of dirt where they graded the roads. The roads were not paved at that time, they were graded. And sometimes they'd wash out and they'd get this dirt and put out there and then grade it back, gravel. And every day these 2 golden eagles would be sitting on this pile of dirt there when we went by, and they were standing about like that tall, about 30 inches tall or so. They were tall. Big eagle. And one of them was gone that day, and I saw him. I was looking around, as I do, Marilyn. You know how I look around. And I saw this eagle fall from heaven, just coming out of the sky just really fast, probably 100, maybe 120, 30 miles an hour coming down, and he hit this cottontail rabbit. And that rabbit started screaming, and he grabbed that rabbit and he took up with those great big wings and took him up in the real high in the sky, maybe 100 or 200 feet, and dropped him. He screamed all the way up, and he screamed all the way down till he hit. Terrified. Rabbits scream, deer scream. Saul and Jonathan, beloved, pleasant in their life, and in their death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. There was a dog here about 35 to 50 pounds a few days ago. A pretty strong dog. He was a German Shepherd and a Queensland Healer Cross. And he was about this tall. And we were going to town, and we were on the way back home, and we saw lights all over here. And you know, I used to be a tracker. I could track pretty good. I tracked animals, and I hunted lions and raccoons and bear and bobcats, etc. And I saw people dashing around all over and these lights going on. I didn't know what was going on. I came in the yard and we had to go down. I came in the yard, got the trash and whatever. We were going to go down to the dump and go to the post office. I went down there and I came back. When I came back, my neighbor, or when I was on my way back, my neighbor called me and said there was a lion that killed one of the neighbor's dogs. Lions are very strong. This lion was a very big lion. I went out there and these foot tracks were big as horses' tracks. And I saw the action. I went out and I took a couple of the neighbors and I showed them out there. I said, right here, they were running. They ran the lion underneath the fence. They ran it out there and the lion began to fight. And he grabbed this one dog and just absolutely must have killed him almost instantly. So strong. And then he drugged the lion back. The lion drugged the dog back, drugged it underneath the fence, and went over there on the porch of the people, or under the porch, and began to eat the dog. And the other dogs were barking and raising Cain. And he's eating this dog that he killed. Stronger than lions. Stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxurious in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How have the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? How have the mighty fallen? David believes this from his very heart in his humility. David was king now. David is king. Saul has fallen and David is king. But along with Saul fallen was Jonathan, and his other brothers are all dead. How have the mighty fallen in the midst of battle? Jonathan is slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Genuine grief and humility. David to say, hey, I'm king now. I'm king. No, he was grieving, genuine grief over his friend, his bosom friend, and over the man that even wanted to kill him. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was more wonderful than the love of a woman. We're not talking about homosexuality here either. We're talking about love. David, sometimes the women that he loved didn't love him. And sometimes it betrayed him, but this man that he loved did not betray him. He took his own life at risk to protect David. He stood against his own father to protect David. How have the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished? Then it came about afterwards that David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to one of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up, David. So David said, where shall I go? And he said, to Hebron. So David went up there, and his two wives also, and Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. David brought up his men who were with him, each one of them with his own household, and they lived in the city of Hebron. Then the men of Judah came and there anointed David king over the house of Judah. And David said, and they told David, saying, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. David sent message to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed of the Lord, because you have shown this kindness to Saul your Lord, and have buried him. Now may the Lord show loving kindness. Now that word loving kindness, that's a messianic title. The man of loving kindness. That's a messianic title. May the Lord show loving kindness and truth to you, and I also will show this goodness to you because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strong, be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. And that's where we're going to quit for this reading. David is a man of true sorrow. He's a man of true and genuine humility. Not one of this is not one thing in here is put on. Not one thing is acting. This is for real. I have seen people that could just bawl and squirt tears out, and just what they were acting. They weren't in grief. I remember one time I went to this man that Marilyn had worked for, and he was really cruel to her. And I told him she wasn't coming back to work. And he, oh, and tears were just flowing down his face. I don't know what I'm going to do. Tell her I will never be mean to her again. All it was put on. Just put on. Just acting. I told him, I said, Marilyn had enough bad treatment in her life already. I said, she's not going to work anymore. This is it. She's not working anymore. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? He wasn't worried about what he had done. He was worried about what he's going to do without Marilyn. He said she was the only one I could trust. She was the only one I could give her $1,000 and she'd come back with it, and not a penny would be gone. To the bank, to the store. But when she was doing it, he was being hateful, threatening her. Well, sometimes what goes around comes around. David was not a man of blood toward his own people. He wasn't. This part of his life was totally honest, totally humble, with genuine grief. As we go through life today, we see fakers in the ministry, fakers and lawyers, fakers. These fakes are all over the world. Have you ever got a phone call and said, we have $100,000 for you? Have you ever got an email that says, I'm going to give all of my money to you, my estate, it's millions of dollars. All you have to do is give me your bank account number. And in life, we go through these kind of things. David was genuine. He was genuine. God blessed Israel all the time that David followed his God. Israel was blessed by him, by his actions. And this is his epitome. This is him at his greatest right here. The most humble he was when he was at his greatest. When you are the most humble, that's when you are your greatest. When you're the most humble in the deepest of grief, God can use you the most. Our Father, we send this message out. Please use it to feed your people, to give us examples of love and honor, humility and grief. And Father, I just ask you to use the message for your honor and glory. Touch people's lives with it all over the world as you've touched ours. Father, please forgive me where I failed you. In Jesus' name I pray.